Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this EVIMalaR sponsored workshop on career opportunities for African scientists working in malaria. I'm very excited to be here today, and I hope you are. Why are we here today? We are here to identify, to discuss, and agree on what the barriers that we face as African scientists are in doing our research, and also to discuss the mechanisms by which we can overcome these barriers. Let me first, of course, introduce myself because even though many of you have heard from me, we haven't met. But my name is Francis Dungu. I'm from KEMRI, the Kenya Medical Research Institute in Kilifi. And I would like to introduce EVIMalaR, of course, which is the sponsoring organization for this workshop. EVIMalaR stands for European Virtual Institute Malaria Research Program. And EVIMalaR is, of course, very interested in integrating with their programs with African scientists and collaborating. And because I do not want to preempt Reine-Marie's talk later this afternoon, who is going to tell us more about EVIMalaR, what it is and what their programs are and what their agenda is for African science is, I'm going to move on and talk about what else is going to be happening. So we have some people from the Wellcome Trust, and especially really happy that Jane Kagea Kayondo is here, who is in charge of African affairs, African programs at the Wellcome Trust. And she's going to tell us what the Wellcome Trust has for African scientists. We also have an organization called the Malaria Eradication Scientific Alliance, MESA, and they're here to tell us about their programs and how they can work with us in a program to eradicate malaria. And that is going to happen later on. So more specifically for this discussion, we have selected some discussants or people who are going to debate on the 5 points that we circulated that have got to do with what we need to do to improve the African situation for malaria researchers. And these people are selected in such a way that we wanted to balance the geographical distribution, like to represent all the different parts of Africa, and also gender. Of course, as you can see, I did not do that very well. Nonetheless, I'm sure we're going to have an exciting discussion, and the document that is going to come out of this discussion will go a long way to improving the situation of African malaria research. So the program for today we'll have this discussion now, and later on we'll have the exhibitions from the Wellcome Trust and MESA, and then at 4 we will have the final session where we'll have short talks from Reine-Marie from the University of Pretoria, who is going to tell us about EVIMalaR and the agenda for African science. And then we will listen to Jane Kagea Kayodo from the Wellcome Trust, who is going to tell us about the programs that the Wellcome Trust has and what we as African scientists can access to. And finally, we will have Professor Brian Greenwood, who is the moderator for this debate now, telling us his experiences in doing work on capacity development in Africa, and his thoughts on what the bottlenecks are and what needs to be done. And now I'll hand you over to Brian, who will moderate this debate. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. It's a very small, select group, but I still think we should be able to have some interesting discussions. So for those of you who don't know me, I work at the London School of Hygiene Tropical Medicine now, but for I think about 30 years I worked in West Africa, so I've seen some of these issues from sort of both the northern and the southern side of things. So our aim this morning is really to try to identify some of the issues, some of the challenges facing African scientists. And I hope that we're not going to just have a list of grumbles and the problems, because everybody does have their problems. We're really looking to try to find some solutions, some suggestions of to come out with some concrete suggestions that we can help in alleviating some of the problems that people face rather than just listing that. So what Francis has done is he's picked out, I don't know, I think we have most people here, but not everybody, some particular topics. We're asking people for one person to stand up just for 2 or 3 minutes. They've each got sort of area to focus on, and then I think hopefully that will go reasonably quickly and we'll have a chance for a sort of open discussion. I think perhaps we won't get everybody to introduce themselves at the moment, but afterwards, then there will be a chance for everybody to talk. When you're asking questions in the general set, just tell us who you are and where you come from, so we can do it at that time. So I think, is that okay, Francis? Shall we start? So I think our first speaker sitting next door to me, Professor Koran from the Noguchi Memorial Research Institute in Ghana, and he's going to say a little bit about, I think, the focus on funding. Isn't that right, Kojo? Yeah.
Thank you. As been mentioned, I'm Kojo Koram from Noguchi Memorial Institute, University of Ghana, and Legon. I got an invitation to speak on this panel, and I felt that, well, this is a very important topic that we have been talking about, but I don't think we can stop talking about it because we still see the problem in front of us. And the issue was, because funding is poor, we should encourage African scientists to move away and to go to other places where they are paid better and also funded better to do their research. So when I had a look at the thing, there are some points there which are probably not contestable, because yes, funding in African countries for not only malaria research but for any research at all is probably non-existent or very poor. Of late, that is beginning to be changing, because I know Tanzania for a couple of years or a few years now has been putting money to research in the country. So the government of Tanzania is actually putting that. Most of our governments have signed on to declarations and deeds and things promising or agreeing to fund research, but we have not held them to that, and they haven't done that. So you have sort of a conundrum of how to go around these things. And I've just put down a few points which I thought I'll bring up, and then maybe others could put up. That research funding from local or national governments, yes, hardly exists. But as I've mentioned, Tanzania has begun to change the things. Most of our governments can actually take the lead in some areas and also drive the research agenda, because what is happening now is that, I'll take my institute for example. We do have some track record in gaining or getting funding and things, but it's always to a call that has been posted by Wellcome Trust, by NIH, by EU or something, and there's hardly a time that we are sitting down actually to decide that this is something of interest for the country for us to do. Having said that, how did we end up in this? The thing is, the training facilities that we have are inadequate, so we end up taking advantage of the technology and the training opportunities outside in the Western countries to train our people. We will continue to do this, and I think if you look at the experience in the Asian countries, where there was a conscious effort to actually send some of their best people out and get some of them back, not everybody goes back, but get some of them back to help in the development of the country, I think that is probably the way that we may have to target things. Some of the data indicates that, I think, returnees or reverse brain drain, whatever they term them, to Korea, for example, probably about 68% of all they sent out have gone back to help with what we are seeing Korea and others doing now. And I think we will have to have a way of getting this into the government agenda somehow to get things going. One way or the other, we have to take cognizance of the fact that it's not easy when people do get back. And coming back, there are a lot of expectations for individuals, their survival, their families and things. So all these sort of, what do you call, maybe push factors and others that people have pointed out. So when you look at it, coming back is not an easy thing, but there are a lot of other factors which depend on that. And one may say that, okay, fine, then why bother? But I think all the same, It's those of us who have been and seen what can be done, who are needed back home to put pressure where we need to put the pressure to be able to change things. So I would argue that, yes, we will have to come back somehow. Life will not be easy, but we'll have to get on with it. The other point was that they would be able to have their successful careers and things. The question is where do you want to have this? Is it home or abroad? Where are you more, needed and things like that? I will argue that we're more able to forge ahead with the research career at home because however little and however small, you're able to define questions which you find are relevant to the local situations where we need such inputs. One story which I would like to share is one of the graduates that we got back. She finished her undergraduate degree at KNUST, one of the universities in Ghana, and went to Georgetown University for her PhD and did brilliant work in doing parasite biology for malaria. And then we got a note to say that she wants to come back and work, and she's heard about Noguchi, what can she come and do? We engaged her. When she was coming, she was thinking that she could do exactly what she was doing in the US in Ghana. We had a look at it and said, look, this is brilliant work and things, but what we need on the continent now, or in the country now, is really to see how we can control malaria better. You have a lot of skills and things. There are problems about transmission and things which we have no idea about. So your issue about your skills and things about parasite biology, could we set up a program looking at how, gametocytes are developed, for example, so that you could, within that, be able to help in terms of new treatments against gametocytes or interventions against gametocytes. She linked up with her supervisors and her contacts in the US, and I can tell you that within a space of about 3-4 years now, she has begun to be able to set up a small unit looking at this issue, which we think is pertinent. She probably couldn't have done, or she could have done that maybe quicker and faster in the US, but that wasn't something which was on the point or the agenda of where she was working at in the US. But only when she's come back, she's happy having come back. But as I said, there are other issues which make life a bit more difficult than being in the US. So when we do go out there, we do have skills and things which we can apply to programs and problems at home if we do get back to get work at. There are other issues which will pull people in, family ties and things, opportunities and some other things. But the general systemic factors we can't run away from. People will need decent schools and decent health care for themselves and for their families. And I wouldn't pretend to know the balance between this. It's not always easy, but I think when we are encouraged to come back home, I believe that we can put the pressure on the government and put where things are. We have to have an organized, systematic effort to tap into the large pool of expertise available outside. They may not even have to come back, but we may have to be able to link up with them and do some of these things. I think in the end, the fact remains that we do need the efforts of the world-trained scientists at home and abroad also to bring their skills and competencies to bear on the problem of not only malaria, but all the other issues that we have to grapple with. And talking about malaria control or elimination, I think we need to have people who will understand the local situations and work in those areas to be able to help us go. I think I'll stop here and let the discussion go on and take up some other things. So thank you.
Yes, I agree with Professor Koram. My name is Janet from Imperial College and also partly from the Kemri Wellcome Trust Center. I agree with everything that Professor Koram has said, and I guess we all appreciate that it's very difficult for African scientists to have a successful career on the continent, mainly because of funding issues, which we all understand, and also because many times you realize you might want to do particular experiments and the type of technology that you require is not available in your local lab. And so that requires you to leave your home ground and go to a lab in the West, in the UK, in the US, where the facilities are much better and you're able to do exactly the kind of experiments that you expect to do. However, the challenge is that while you'll be there and you do what you want to do while you're abroad, when you need to come back, what then do you come back to? And so there needs to be system whereby there's a transfer of technology so that while you're going out, the team that you're going to and the funder that is funding you to go and work out of your home country needs to consider the fact that when you return, a plan needs to be in place so that you can be able to carry forward the same type of research that you have been doing abroad, or probably just facilitate you that you're able to do nearly the same type of work that you have been carrying out abroad. Because if you come back home and you're totally unable to do anything that's similar or close to what you've been doing out there, then you're basically regressing. You're moving backwards, because if you're in a lab where you're able to sequence genomes and do high-tech research and, you know, mass spectroscopy and stuff like that, and then you come home and this equipment is not available, then what are you coming back to? And so, while we need to come back, yes, but then what are we coming back to? Maybe that's a point to discuss. Another issue that I see in the notes is regarding the fact that African scientists don't need to come back because we are better paid abroad, well-funded and better paid abroad. I'd like to throw this question to the group here, whether we actually think that we're better paid abroad. Do we all agree that the salary out there is better than the salary at home? So I'll put that across as a point for discussion. Yeah.
So, I mean, your point is taking into the cost of living and everything
Yes.
else.
The whole package.
If you're living, yes, if you're
Yes.
trying to live in the middle of London,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
expensive.
And especially if you have a family and you're trying to live in the middle of London or trying to live in the middle of America, and compared to when you're at home, where would you rather be? Yeah.
Morning, I'm Umar Gai. I'm professor of parasitology at the University Sheikh Anta Diop. I'm the head of the department, and also I'm chairing the research committee of the National Malaria Control Program. So I think you are right. You have many issues in Africa, but I want also to highlight that things has changed in many settings, in many countries, and in many universities. And for me, the big challenge really is the development of scientists locally, and it is possible. If really the government, the Ministry of Higher Education, the Ministry of Health, which is handling malaria control, things really to put funds and to allow university to develop, it's possible to develop local scientists. Mm-hmm. But in the same time, also we can agree that collaboration is instrumental in this development of local universities. We need really to collaborate with our partners in North, in Europe, in US, everywhere where it's possible really to set collaboration. And doing that, it's possible to have scientists trained in Africa and having also a link in North. One good example I can say is the Malaria Capacity Development Consortium, where our PhD are trained locally, are registered locally, trained locally, but with also a collaboration, a very strong collaboration with North, London School, Liverpool, Copenhagen University, elsewhere. We have also other experiences with Harvard University and also in other settings in North. And in doing that, we have now scientists well trained, and if we follow them very, very, very closely, it's possible really to find for them some position as a postdoc position, or why not position as a teacher and scientist at the university. In Senegal, we have this kind of experiences. I can say right now that really the government is very aware of this issue, and really they are trying to put now more funds in the training at the university locally. It's a kind of thing really we need to think, but I know sometimes it's frustrating to know that our scientists are trained abroad, and when they come back, they do not find good facilities to develop their career. But by the same time also, some good experiences has been developed, and we need really to move forward.
The problem is that there is very limited funding for like the national institutions like where I come from. And so there are a lot of well-trained scientists, from Kenya, in America or in Britain, in other countries. But in fact, they cannot, in spite of all that training, get a job back home. What can we do to bring them back? So that's the problem. And I mean, of course, you have your experience in Mali, and I don't know how much maybe funding is going into creating these positions, but in Kenya, actually, it is not happening. And I suppose that's what we need to come up with, an action thing that we can follow, maybe agitate for something to happen.
Just a couple of points. I think I agree with all that you said, but there's one thing which we'll probably have to put on the table, and that is collaboration between ourselves on the continent. Because I don't see that often. Invariably, what we do see is that we all meet at these meetings and then we go back. I don't see you in Ghana, you don't see me in Senegal, and I think we need to have a look at that and change some of these things. There are some opportunities for us to meet locally and things, and we need to be looking at that. There may be other things which just stepping over to Ghana or maybe stepping over to Senegal we may be able to do. Having said that, it's not always, in fact, it's probably easier for me to get to London than getting to Senegal from Accra. So that's also another issue we have to put on the board. But the other thing we need to probably have to begin to look at is maybe look at what is happening in, say, US, universities and other places. And let our governments agree that, yes, you come back, you bring a grant, and your salary is on that, maybe for the next, I don't know how many years until you're tenured or something, because the governments will not, maybe they may be able to pay as if they organize the funds and the monies properly, but I don't think they're interested in doing that at the moment. So let us be able to engage them to change the view of things that, okay, I'm here, I'm bringing in this so much, and this is part of it is paying my salary. Once they agree to that, I think most of us will be able to come back with their contacts and things and be able to settle up some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, that is not, people are finding you can come back with a grant. I mean, if somebody came to the London school and went to see the director and said, I've just been given a $2 million grant, and they'd say, when do you want to start? Where's your office? And I mean, we know some people coming back to Africa have found that difficult because they've been told, I mean, Senegal is perhaps a bit different to change that, but some places have said, well, there is no post available, so sorry, you can't come. Yes, so I think that is an issue that needs changing. So we have a question from the back there. So.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Damian Nwaneri. I'm a research fellow, Institute of Child Health, University of Benin, and a consultant pediatrician, University of Benin Teaching Hospital, Benin City in Nigeria. I'm also a coordinator of the program, Nigerian Malaria Control Program, being executed by Family Care Association, an NGO in Nigeria, sponsored by ExxonMobil Foundation. The issues raised so far had been there, and I think everything is still tied down to funds. I want to look at it in three categories. The program itself, of course, which include research and other malaria control programs, the human resources, and then, of course, the last aspect of it revolving around funding. I believe that Africa has the resources, just like the last speaker had said, the human resources, both within the country and even outside the country. But the issue here is how to coordinate these resources humanly, intra-country and then inter-country, from what Prof has said from Ghana. And we're looking at it in this way. What could be the role that the government will want to play to harmonize this? I've been in a national program where funders were there, stakeholders, funders. UNICEF donated this, Wellcome Trust this, ExxonMobil that and that. And question was asked, how much did the government put in for this kind of funding for this particular project? And I'm sure you know your answer is just as good as mine. That is where the problem is. Are there ways we can encourage the individual countries to fund? It's easy to meet in Harare, Zimbabwe, or in Addis Ababa for AU meetings, and we talk about under 5 mortality rate. We talk about problems of malaria and pneumonia, and at the end of that heads of state programs, policies are put down, and everybody goes back to the different countries, and they are all in papers. Are there ways we can pull this together? I believe that Africa has both the human resource within even the same country and outside the country. And if these things can be annexed together, especially being championed at the governmental levels, so as to see how the government will not so much depend on donors, because over-dependent on donors had been the major issues, and so each individual country tends to pull back in what appear to be the major responsibility. Number 2, the government will want to look at what are the benefits, financial benefits. They are not looking at, there's a lot of benefit even as we are discussing, but most people around, I'm sorry to say, at most of the governmental level are looking at what we can grab at this moment. And when they look at it and they are not seeing it, everybody tends to move down in their own way. But at that way, we can set up something that can also help to encourage the government that we are not looking at now, but we're also looking at what the future can bring. And then finally, as what the Prof said, intra-country collaboration, inter-country collaboration. Even intra-institution and inter-institution collaboration can also go a long way to see how we can enhance some of the things that we are talking about. Thank you.
Because I agree with you. I mean, I think that is a really a key point. And as far as I know, I mean, COSTECH in Tanzania is the only country that really is doing that seriously, that they are putting the government money into the central science funding in a way that many other countries have made a commitment to do but are not doing. India was very successful at that, in Bangalore, for example, and that they were offering people, this is perhaps 10 or 15 years ago, $25,000 or $40,000 salary, less than they were getting in the United States. But people preferred that. They went home. They were able to attract very good people back into the IT industry and the biotechnology industry on that sort of level, perhaps earning half the salary of what they were getting in Washington. But people were able to do that. And they wouldn't have gone back for $5,000. But the quality of life was different. So I mean, that is an issue, but you have got to get it to the level, as Kojo said, where you have decent schooling and decent healthcare.
I just want to pose one question to the House. When we see the problem of carriers in Africa, it's also related somehow with the objectives that we have a training in the West. What I wanted to say that when we go to the West for training, the kind of training that we receive is a very high-tech science where it may end up in good publications. But when we come back home, the kind of knowledge that's required is not in that level. Probably it might be sort of operational. For instance, if you come to my country, the people is being challenged by diseases, and operational research are more important than basic research back home. But the training is not of that sort. So probably we may need to balance between the two. Mm-hmm. That's why governments are not interested to fund and support scientists back home, because the outcome of the scientists is not directly fit to the program or solve the problem of the people in the ground. So I wanted to suggest that funders also need to consider this when they give trainings, be it PhD or whatever grant. They need to balance between basic research and operational research, so that careers will be created in the ground. Thank you.
There is a generic element to that, and I agree, you may have to adapt. You can't do exactly what you were doing in Washington or something, but so that may be what you have to. But that basic training of being able to think as a scientist is very important, you know, and enable people to adapt. I mean, do you want to comment? You agree with that? I mean, you learn certain attitudes of work.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, when we had a discussion at the back there, we did mention that attitude has a lot to do with it. But also, let's not get to the point where we tend to think that going abroad for training is all bad. It is good. It's a good thing to do because, first of all, you build very useful collaborations. You learn a lot of skills that you would never have laid your hands on if you just stayed in your country. And you also get out of your comfort zone because definitely the exposure that you get when you go abroad is very important for going forward in terms of applying for funding, getting those links and knowing how people interact and how it happens in the real research environment. But if I just stayed in my university, for example, and never went out to America or to Imperial College to interact with the people there and learn new skills and meet new people, learn new things, I don't think I'd be the same person that I am today if I never went there. So it's all important, it's good to go, but the important thing is how then do we apply what we learn out there to bring it back home and be able to proceed as we should. So
I think we should go. We'll come back to you later. So that we're worried we're going to.
Can I make a short comment?
Very.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I just want to link up the last presenter and that of the gentleman who talked about local training of scientists in Africa. Now, if you're going to train scientists in Africa, then you will need to train them in the perspective of the African set research agenda for malaria control. Because that's where the dichotomy is coming from. Who is funding? What is the funding interest, etc.? Because if you have funding bodies, when they give in the money, they have an agenda to wish to accomplish. But I think the whole concept that we need to revisit is what our research priorities, immediate needs that Africans need to address. And that would be, I think, would be a starting point for us to be able to convince our governments to plow in funds for local or national research. Because I wouldn't see a government of ours in Africa that will want to put in huge sums of money because they are looking for some genes, etc. They want to see the results come out in terms of how many lives have been saved, what products have come out that are making mothers to go back to their farms and workers to stay at work, and not whether we're going to have new genes that can protect you or not, etc. So I think there is a fundamental issue here, and that Africa has not set for itself a research agenda, which is relevant to the local problems that they face, so they can train the scientists who will, living in those problems, will grow up and adapt and stay in the community to solve them. But the moment I'm not saying that external funding, external training is bad. Of course, we need to continue to improve our technological skills. Okay, and that's why when they come back, they become irrelevant because the agenda for research and the priority setting for research in Africa is at par with the Western communities. So that's my premise.
Well, we may come back to, but I think we should move on. So, Isaka Segara from MRTC in Mali.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor Greenwood, and I'm pleased to be invited here. My colleague Egwang will also tell about the topic that we are discussing. I think the topic we are discussing is really if Western funders do not need to create special funding schemes for African scientists. So their responsibility is to their citizens or to high quality research independent of geographical or similar constraint, as this will maintain a culture of dependence. So African scientists should ever agitate their government to increase funding positions or give up for alternative careers. These are the topic my colleague and I will be discussing with you, and of course have also your input on that. I think, yes, I will say from our experience, my name is Isaga Sagara, and I'm at Malaria Research and Training Center, University of Bamako. And yes, I agree mainly with this topic, saying that from my perspective, main staff really should be supported by the local government. This is very important. Taking experience at Malaria Research and Training Center in Bamako, let's say senior investigators are mainly really supported by government, which means that they are mainly government workers, which means also that you have, I would say, two levels. One could be like classified like university personnel, and the other could be what we call research personnel. So they are organized in the way that either you are part of university or you are part of research personnel, the salary scale will depend on your level in each side. It's both sides is really good. And being a senior scientist, then government will be supporting really your monthly salary. Of course, let's say this salary is very important because it will keep really for you to doing the research, sustainability. There is a sustainability by doing so. And of course, you cannot ask probably to the government. It's difficult for you to ask to the government to make the difference, for your institutions. But already by doing so, you can then really have a strong team and then attract grants. You can apply for attract grants, and with this grant, you can also would say you can make a monthly payment for your personnel. So that's very important. At least you have really the main staff investigators supported by the government, and where you can really attract over grant. Then you can, so that you will have, I would say, acceptable salary at the end, really to stay at home. And at Malaria Research and Training Center, this is really what we are doing, and I think is so far working. And the team, in terms of maintaining the staff, is important also to have a view on the diversity. For a research team, you need really to make sure that you build a team with the diversity to make sure that you can achieve, let's say to A to Z research. What I mean is you need to have in your staff, scientists, clinical investigators, but it's very important to have also the core staff. What I mean the core staff is like also you need to have also, a strong capacity in, let's say, as an example, field of epidemiology, field of biostatistics, field of data management, field of IT. This core is really very important if really you want to have outside grant to be competitive. It's very important you have this support, not only really scientists or clinical investigators, but the core is very important. And from our experience is this is, I think, something we are particularly for the core support is a lacking things in most of our African institutions. So now more and more, really people will look if you have capacity on core team, including also management and logistics. So that's we have lucky this last decade we have capacity to build also the core at MRTC, which really facilitate for us really to also bring grant in addition to the main staff supported by government, which is really for us the main thing is necessary. Yeah. The other thing is that for infrastructures, so really you can't be you can't do really good research if there is really no infrastructures. Infrastructures are very important. Of course, you need infrastructure, solid infrastructure centrally, and have like mass spectral machine or more complicated machine, which is very important centrally. But you really now more and more need also infrastructures on field. So building we have around 10 infrastructures built directly on field, which mean villages, where we are making really our research. You have a really main lab based also on field, so that you really can do also research on timely manner, and so that also you will have patience to make sure that the time and the ethical issue and all are clear easily and efficiently on field. That's very important. You have to have infrastructures. That's very infrastructure. And then the last thing I would say is really also, of course, if you want to be listened by your local government, it's very important you design at the beginning and make sure that you have connections with your respective national control programs. From our side is malaria, but is true for other programs too. So really you have to have a connection with national malaria control programs so that really they are aware of, and so that they will have importance. Like when you talk about the drug resistance, they know that directly you are working with them toward, and they are informed, and so that also it will facilitate for you to ask for government then to also to hire some of your high trained investigators, so that it will easier the process as well. So having the connection with national malaria control program, since we are working mainly on malaria area, this is also very important. And also it will help also for the implementation of policies or policy changes. So that I think the 4 areas that I have talked for me is very important, and my colleague Agwang certainly will go through the details. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Connie Agwang from Kampala. I work with MedBiotech Laboratories. So I agree with what he has said, but I just want to tackle this point in two parts as it's put. The first part says that Western funders do not need to create special funding schemes, for African scientists, as this will maintain a culture of dependence. Well, I would agree with that, but I would also disagree with that. I would agree with that for one reason, that if these schemes are not, if we're not given like probably preference or schemes specifically for African scientists, it would also encourage us, to think out of the box, to encourage us to come up with ideas which probably which will be looking at mechanisms of how some of these diseases actually, the pathogenesis of some of these infections, instead of us just, going to where everybody else has gone. It would encourage us to go to virgin places where nobody has gone, and that's the way we are going to attract, funding. If we come up with, brilliant ideas, things which are not probably out of the ordinary, but actually in the end will generate results which are going to be helpful for the people. That's how I agree with this. This first part. I also disagree because, given the kind of experience and the expertise that we have in Africa is not similar to what she talked about, the skills that we acquire when we go out there. So if we are placed on the same platform to compete for these grants, it's like 2 groups. One group is down here and then the other one is up, and you're all competing for something, for one thing. So the person that is up definitely would have higher chances of getting this thing that you're competing, because of the experience, the expertise that they have. So this would, I would support the idea of having special schemes just for the Africans to compete as Africans. Because when you compete with, we know our problems, we know how to, the kind of problems we face, and maybe we have better ways of addressing these issues. So we would address them based on, having in the back of our minds like how these things actually can be addressed. And then that African scientists should agitate to their government to increase funding. Yes, I agree with this. Because, we have money in Africa. Africa is so rich, it's so blessed, we have lots of resources, but many times the governments do not want to support research because we have not presented, Someone talked about the research agenda. We don't exactly know what we want to do. We don't convince them. Some of these people have not done science. They don't understand the science. They don't know, the kind of terms that we have. Well, you know them. These people don't know. These people probably, they are lawyers, they are business people. They want us to present this information in the layman's language. Many times we go to them with all these big words, they don't understand, you just confuse them and they don't see the need, to give us the money. So we need to present our agenda in a very simple way and yet bring out the point. Yeah? So that's why I think that we should encourage our government to support us. And then when you write these researches, these grants, let's involve them right from the beginning. Right from the inception, when you have your like for example in Uganda, we have a government arm that approves all research. So we go there, we just want approval to do our research. You explain to them, you convince them this thing is going to do this, and they'll give you the approval, but that's the end of it all. But we need to involve these people right from the time of approval, through the progress of the study, like the results that you've obtained. How are they going to be beneficial to the community? Because that's what they want to know. How is the research going to benefit the community? So we need to involve these people, take them through the whole research, the study, the progress, the results, and how are we going to translate these results into good policies which are going to bring about the, health in our communities. So let's involve them. Let's not just go to them. Let's not just go to them for approval and then that's the end of it. Let's involve them right from the start through the study and then the results. And that's when they'll be able to translate our results into policies. So many times we bring these results and they take long to implement, to translate them into policy because they don't really understand. But if you've been with them right from the beginning, through the study and to the end of it all, these policies will be implemented very fast. I give an example of the malaria. Chloroquine was being used. It reached a point where it was failing almost 100%. But there was data showing that this drug is actually failing. But the policymakers, they just took their time to change the policy because for some reason, I think they didn't think it was true. But if you involve them right from the start and they understand, when you tell them that this thing needs change of policy, they'll be able to act, and they'll act very fast. However, we also need to, on the issue of involving governments, we probably need to create a platform whereby we interact. I think that's the same thing I said. We interact with them, on various issues. Like create a platform where we interact with them instead of one person being this side, another one being on the other side. So you don't have really a point where you interact, you share ideas, maybe they tell you what their programs are, and then you also share with them how you can be able to play a role in implementing these programs. So interaction with our governments is also very important.
It's like, so MRTC is very successful. Everybody would say that it's one of the best malaria research centers in Africa. How much of your scientists, of the salaries, are supported either through the ministry or through the university, as opposed to being supported by the outside funders? Have you got a rough idea?
The salary depends on your level. As I said, some personnel are what we call teaching, part of a university. MRTC, when you consider MRTC, is within the University of Bamako. But still, you have some personnel, they are really from a part of the university, which means they are doing, teaching, so that they have a salary from the government because they are teaching. But some they are not part of the teaching part, but they are a researcher part. So they are also having, depending on their level, the salary. Let's say that you are what we call like Professor Gay. He is a professor. That means at the university level, their salary directly linked to the professor. Depending on the region, I think in our region, in terms of salary itself, in West Africa, I would say Senegal is paying very good. What we understood from the teaching part. Then you also have from the research part, you have, let's say that if you are a director of research, you are like also a professor. So your salary being a director of research is similar to the salary of being a professor. So we have both of the personnel and the salary is the same. And both are paying by the government. And as I said, the part is that most of our senior investigators, almost all, they are supported by the government, being researchers or being teachers. So you will have a basic salary, which I would say is really not bad if you take the, the salary from the other people. Really, I would say it's good, and is probably less good than the salary in Senegal, but probably for our life, we can't complain compared to others in general. And if you add to that, being a researcher, you have to recognize that we work really very hard and very late, all the time working, almost no weekend and no holidays. Particularly from MRTC, we are really working, and being this hard work, staying also with only the government salary, is not really enough. And that's where the government allowed us, because some NGO or even some Western universities, they said that, okay, our law cannot pay you if you are working, if you are having already the salary. So what the mechanism we had with the university is that by law, we have authorization to have also be paying by our grant research. So that also is transparent. You have a logistic called Mali Service Center set up there. Then they will look on, depending on your effort, they will say 10% effort, 20% effort, like in US, so that you can also be paid by the grant that you are bringing. But at the last, if let's say that, sometimes the one grant finish, and before you get another, if you don't have this senior investigator sustained by the government, everything will go down. And that's why I'm saying it's very important that we as a senior investigators, we maintain this so that, and then if the grant finish, you can apply for another grant. And having a grant, finally you will have a kind of two salary, which probably for some, it will be relative, it could be up to comparable to what in the Western countries you will be earning at the end. And so being in the country where the life expenses is less, I think is right for them really to have good life. But it's very hard to work.
Giving MRTC as a good example, as a model, I think during the coffee break you can talk to some of your colleagues and explain to them how you've managed to persuade, because Mali is not as rich as some of the other countries that are represented here. Somehow you have managed to persuade them, the ministry, both to fund the researchers.
I just wanted to share a little bit from Noguchi and from University of Ghana. We cannot do this for the senior people, and I think that is where we have a problem, because, as I said, I don't see any reason why if somebody came in with a grant, we shouldn't give him a desk and a lab for him to do what he or she was doing somewhere else. But at Noguchi, about 30 to 40% of the staff, especially the middle people that we need in the labs and things, are directly paid by the grants, because the government doesn't have money. The government has positions for them, all right, but it says, I don't have money, don't employ anybody this year. So if we follow that, we'll end up sitting down and not doing anything. So we have about 30 to 40% of them engaged directly on those grants. So you come in, and the salary will be the same as if you were employed by the government, or sometimes even better, because we need to attract people. So that is how we've been able to keep things going. What it does is that it puts pressure on us, because when that grant is ending, that is somebody's life, which you have to really make sure that you don't throw the person off. One, they are good. Two, so we've also tried to toss things around, give them training opportunities, get them to some of these meetings and things for them also to come up and some of those things.
Okay, so we'll have a question in a minute back. Corinne, do you want to comment? So I mean, your point was you've got to persuade, like in Uganda, you've got to persuade your government to do what they're doing in Mali. And how are you going to do that?
Well, I think the major problem that I think probably is causing this in Uganda is there is no proper communication between the two groups. So I believe if there is communication, and like I said, that we as scientists should present our agenda in the most simple but meaningful way. These people will be able to understand. Because our government arms there are not many scientists within the government. These are the people who are going to make policies. So they have to understand exactly what do you mean by, okay, maybe I can say something like, drug resistance. Okay, that's maybe a simple word, but there's some of these jargons that only scientists can understand. These people don't understand them. So they will see these things in your proposal and they will say, what is this? They want something they can understand, and that probably is also in line with their programs. Now, there are so many programs that the Ministry of Health in Uganda has, mostly, control of malaria, things like, we have emerging diseases like nodding disease, some of those. They would be interested. But we need to present our agenda in the most simple and yet meaningful. So communication, really, I think, would be the thing that is going to crack the nut, at least in my country.
So that maybe we come at the end of one of the issues is how you do that, because this is not an issue just especially for Africa. I mean, in the UK, the scientific community had to work extremely hard to persuade the government when everybody's budget was being cut, not to cut, and in fact it managed to maintain the budget. So it isn't just a unique situation to Africa. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to share a little bit of experience we've had, and I'm sure Professor Quorum also has had that kind of training. I think there will be an absolute need to train and deploy advocates and lobbyists, because that, like he said, that occurs everywhere. We've had that experience with the Malaria Vaccine Initiative, where we've had those involved in malaria control programs all over Africa being invited and funded and trained in advocacy. And I've tried it out twice or three times, and it's worked. Because you just need, in 1 minute, to a parliamentarian who is just stopping by to the bank to cash some money and say, excuse me, Honorable, I just have this thing, and you just use the keywords, and he stops and listens to us. So this guy has something to say. Or even to a journalist. You just use 1 minute, and then you can convince him and say, okay, meet me at this time and we can discuss that. So I think that's one area that we have not worked on as Africans, to train advocates, lobbyists who can go out there, meet those who are important in making decisions, the parliamentarians, senators, ministers, etc., and some of the companies, the private sector, and advocate for funding of our research agenda, if we have one already.
There is an issue whereby researchers trained in African universities. Let's say somebody has a PhD from an African university and another one from Cambridge, for example. You'll find that the person from Cambridge will be able to win grants easily than somebody who trained in Africa. And at the end, the Cambridge-trained scientist will take off easily in his research career than somebody else. So I think the funding agencies should not discriminate depending on where you graduated from.
I think it's quality.
Does the Wellcome Trust differentiate on where somebody gets their PhD from in giving them a grant?
Capacity building was one of those schemes which were Africa-based. Everything happened in Africa, or the training was in Africa. The retention rate was high. People didn't have to leave. But there was always this nagging fear that is the quality of training as good as it would be in Cambridge or in London School. So I think it's a question of us as a continent stepping back and making sure that we are supervising as best we can. We are offering courses of a very high quality. We are mentoring the students we take on. We are not just taking off the box of you have your PhD at the end when we haven't ensured the quality. But of course, these funding competitions are open competitions. They don't have a separate scoring sheet for someone who trained in Cambridge as opposed to a scoring sheet for somebody who trained in Makerere. They will use the same scoring sheet. So I think we just need to make sure that the quality of training we are offering on the continent is as good as we can get it, to the best of our capabilities. And if we do that, people will win competitions. But I think there's a kind of, what do they call it? Just saying that I supervise, comme ça, comme si, I mentor, comme ça, comme si, at the end I give a PhD. You can't do it like that. they will not win the competitions. But it's not the funding agencies being biased. It's that sometimes the quality is not good.
Hi, I'm Lynn Marie Burkholz from University of Pretoria, South Africa. I want to get back to the question of, how do we convince governments to fund malaria research, particularly malaria research? And some comments have been made that it is a problem worldwide, how do you get research funding? I think, however, the difference in Africa, there is a big difference between African funding organizations and other westernized funding organizations in context of research funding. Because in Africa, the question is, are we talking to the correct people? Malaria funding in Africa is going to control programs. It's not going to research funding. And that's the distinction. So we cannot talk to the Department of Health where the priorities there is to fund control programs. They're dealing with a crisis. They need to handle that. We as scientists should be talking to the Department of Science and Technology or other governmental authorities handling research funding. And in that context, then we're sitting with the same situation like in the EU, where we now have to convince those funding authorities or governmental structures that malaria should be a research priority as well as a control situation in public health systems. And I think that is something that's going to take a huge mind shift. And we need to have the control people talking to the science and technology people in government. There's a total disconnect sometimes between those two authorities.
Yeah, I'm Abdi. I come from Cambry Wellcome Trust in Kilifi. So, let me see. So I want to argue for African research institutions and universities have the right attitude and have the right accountability channels and culture to do the best research. The only drawback is poor funding, otherwise they will have been centers of research excellence. So first of all, I have to say African institutions are as old as African countries, so they cannot be compared to Western institutions. So, but I have to say that they have the right attitude because, for example, I come from Kenya, and the main institution that have been mandated to do medical research is Cambry, and Cambry has been collaborating with, many Western institutions that do research, like universities, such as University of Oxford, London School, and also the CDC of America. So that shows that Cambry has an attitude for research, has the right attitude for research, and the culture, because it has been collaborating with these institutions for long. The only problem is that the African researchers themselves in these institutions are not the ones driving the agenda of research, and this be due to where the funding is coming from. So if the African researchers had the funding, probably they would have been being the one that driving the agenda for the research. But the fact that they've understood that they don't have the money to do the research, and therefore the fact that they have collaborated and established a collaboration with the people who have the money shows that they have the right attitude and the right culture to do research. And also there are also many smaller, with the expansion of education system, there are many small universities coming up which are very interested to establish themselves, and actually, and so the younger researchers are actually the best place to go to those institutions where they can have a better influence in the direction in which the university has to take. And so I will say that African researchers have the right attitude and the right culture. The only problem is they don't have the right funding to drive the agenda of the research by themselves. My friend Andanye hopefully will crush that argument.
So I agree with him. However, I found that accountability is a big problem in African universities. So I'll not look at the research institutes. I'll more basically zero on universities. So in terms of accountability, it's whereby you expect a system whereby we insiders and outsiders of the institutions know exactly what is going on towards achieving the goals of the university, such as efficiency, stimulation of the economy, improving quality of education, or achieving national goals. So the universities are basically supposed to be accountable to the government, the market, which is the parents, students, and as well as to the faculty, that is the professional body, like the lecturers and the researchers. However, there are a number of questions that have arisen because of lack of accountability. For example, most African universities don't publish accurate information about themselves, whether they are performing, their research outputs, and so on. Most of these universities don't allow autonomy and freedom, academic freedom for students and faculty to enable them achieve the goals of academics. Then most of the management of the universities does not reflect the diversity of the country. As well, most research groups don't reflect the diversity of the country in terms of the composition. Then the other thing is that a number of universities do not peg their financial support on merit and need. There's a lot of issues of ethnicity and who do you know. Then the other issue is that still on publishing issues about the university, most universities don't publish their budgets, neither do they publish their audited financial reports or forecasts. Then most universities don't have endowment funds, showing that they are not accountable and therefore generous, rich citizens cannot give them any money. I used something so as to illustrate what is happening in African universities, which is maybe controversial, and that is the Times ranking of universities. Among the top 200 universities, the first African university appears at position 126, that is UCT. Then others come at around 150 and so on. And if you look at the indicators used for the ranking, you can extrapolate that there is no accountability in most African universities. That's why they are ranked poorly. For example, teaching and learning environment accounts for 30%. In this case, if there's poor teaching and learning environment, it means the university is not accountable to the students nor the faculty. Then it also means there's poor spending of the public money, and it means the academic standards are very low. Then the other criteria used, or the indicator, is research volume and reputation, which takes 30%. It implies that if your research is poor, then you do not competitively recruit, neither do you retain qualified faculty. Then there is no freedom to pursue academic purposes and processes. Then it means you do not attract nor enroll excellent students. That is for graduate studies. The other thing could be that you're not spending well the research funds and the motivation is poor. Let me take a breath. Okay. Just to finish up. The other criteria is industry, income, and innovation, which is 2.5%. It means industry is not interested in African universities. I don't know why. The other thing is that it means we do not foster innovation because maybe we don't have the right management or the right students or the right staff, or there's a problem with that group. Then it means we're also inefficient because industry will want to put money where there is efficiency. Then lastly, then it's about international outlook. Do we attract international students and can we retain them? can we also attract international faculty, even if it's for short-term research? And can we retain them, maybe to be coming over frequently to share skills and experiences? And also, on the international outlook, are we able to compare ourselves with other universities out of the continent, or we don't want to do that? So that's my opinion.
Okay. So if I get that right, I mean, Warren is suggesting that the university environment is not very attractive. I mean, are you suggesting that's really just lack of money, or are you think it is a lack, that money is not being very well spent, or the university is not being very well organized? Because that might be easier to deal with than actually the funds.
I think the money is there. It's just the organization, and even if the money is there, money gets spent. So we need to have a system whereby we are able to attract a continuous flow of income, and maybe we are able to generate income as well. So the money to start off, I think, is there.
Sorry, just you're coming to me. I mean, we can come to Ghana as well, because I think that perhaps we're beginning to see changes. So you're saying that, I mean, one of the other things, some of the money's not coming in from philanthropy, which in the United States, for example, at Harvard or something, is a big chunk of their money, and also from industry. And for example, in Ghana, there's some very wealthy people there. Are they giving money to the universities, or perhaps there's something happening, isn't there?
I'll take that first and then ask you a question later. Back home, there is something happening, although on a very small scale. What I've been seeing of late is that the university has a student financial aid schemes, and I've been seeing companies contributing every now and then. Somebody will come and give some substantial money to the, yes, and then for infrastructure too, some things are coming in terms of relationship between the university and the community to support student housing and things has also been done on the campus. But the question I wanted to ask was, you did mention about competitive hiring, but then you also put up an issue about representation of the public, diversity and things like that. But if is it an issue of that you don't have an equal representation or something which looks like the national representation because of the quality issues that we discussed, similar to the funding issues? Because if you're going to hire competitively, then you're going to hire those who are best and things. And if by one way or the other you don't end up with a national representation, then that is it. But I think I will err on the side of hiring competitively. So I wanted to get your further explanations on that.
There are some universities which will hire competitively, but this is determined by departments, because departments will definitely interview the people, then decide who are they hiring. So it depends with how accountable the department is. If the department is accountable to everybody else, then I think the hiring will be balanced. However, I think in Africa, most countries, you'll find that maybe there's better education in one province than the other province. So at the end of the day, you find people from a particular province overrepresented in a particular institution than others. But there are cases whereby people are not just hired because of ethnicity or because of such that, okay, there's an example of a university in Kenya whereby most people in the university, both staff and both supporting staff and academic staff, there's a greater percentage of that population coming from one region of the country, and other people from the country are not represented equally. So I think I've answered your question.
Well, I think I just want to make one or two comments, and I'll ask my question. Starting from what you presented earlier about remuneration. Frankly, most countries, for example in Nigeria, I would want to say over the last 10 years, there has been an improvement, even remuneration for lecturers, researchers, and so on. But that is personal remunerations. I have to really say that, of course, man necessarily may not be satiable because you want more. It may not be enough. We want to equate ourselves with maybe some of the researchers in the UK or in the US, which may not necessarily be the same because the resources may not necessarily be the same. But there has been an improvement on remuneration on the individual lecturers, researchers, and so on. But what we're actually looking at is the issue of research. Again, there are a lot of areas of research: HIV, TB, pneumonia, both communicable and non-communicable diseases. We are looking at emphasis on malaria, how that important could be on malaria itself. Are there ways we can also put up even malaria research institutes on its own, country by country, even province by province? We are looking at institutes. Is there any way we can look at collaboration of different researchers, even within the universities themselves, to put through? Now, back to what you said about the universities. I agree with you that we have some challenges in our universities, both in terms of management and so on. But we also know that some universities have their different faculties where they emphasize more on one or two research. Some institutes could be known for virology. Some people could be known maybe some specific areas on virology. It could be HIV. It could be on Lassa fever, because there's an institute in a university in my country. They are well known for Lassa fever research. And every fund, both within the country and outside the country, is channeled towards that particular area. So if I have that at the back of my mind, I will now go back to the issue that you raised about poor management. Yes, there may be, but some of the universities are also doing their best. But when we have one university taking through all different, how do I put it, all different works, it may be difficult to manage. But if we can have universities where we can, or institutes or institutions that can take care of one or two infectious diseases and manage, like I mentioned, this university, there's nothing, anytime you mention Lassa fever in Nigeria, everybody knows, oh, that is the University of so and so. Of course, they have other areas they are working, but when you mention Lassa fever, it goes to that. I want us to look at it in our own universities where we can say, malaria, yes, we say, oh, University of Makerere, for example, or University of Lagos, every time malaria, every time about research. And I believe that the government itself, when we set up an agenda, will be able to key into that. Because, like one of the speakers said, Africa has the resources, both human and even some of the material resources. The problem is management. And I believe that if we put this agenda, the government will also be interested in putting in their funds to it. Thank you.
Okay, I think we should move on. So I think we're back to Janet again, isn't that right? So you're going to talk a little bit about samples, and is that something this time? Okay.
Yeah, I'll talk about, on her point, there was one point that says if governments cannot increase funding, positions should give up for alternative careers. To which I beg to disagree. You've invested so much time, so we probably just want to press on with it. But then I'll go on to the next point, which talks about research using material from Africa should be performed in Africa, and in exceptional circumstances, should it be released outside the country or the region. This will encourage research, transfer of research skills to Africa. I'd like to agree partially, because the research material from Africa actually belongs to Africa. And in actual fact, it's a lot easier to move research material from Africa into the other countries, but it will always be more difficult to move it back to Africa if you ever want to. However, what I think should happen here is that the African countries should have good ethical standards and proper procedures put in place which should justify the need to move research material from Africa into the UK, for example. If you want to carry out some assays in the UK, then in the research protocol that you're writing, from the start of the research, even at the point that you're seeking funding, you have then laid out everything that you need to do in your work. And at that point, you will indicate the need to do some work abroad. And at that point, when you're seeking ethical approval for research material, for example, if it's blood, then you need to put in a justification for moving that blood to a different lab. I'll give an example of what we do at KEMRI. When you want to do research in KEMRI, the first thing you have to do is write a research protocol, which then have to go through the scientific committee for approval before it even goes through the ethical review committee for approval. And we always have to justify why we need to move material from KEMRI to another country. And so it should be performed in Africa, yes, but what happens if you do not have the facilities to conclude your work in Africa? Then you will need to collaborate with someone in another lab in another country, and so material has to be moved anyway. So I think what needs to happen is we need to have proper channels, proper procedures, proper rules in place that govern how research material is being moved from Africa to a different country. The next point says this will encourage transfer of research skills from abroad to Africa. Another thing that KEMRI does is before the approval of research that involves KEMRI and another Western institution, you'll always get a reviewer asking, how is this important to us? What are we benefiting from this? And there's always going to be a requirement for you to put in a component of either someone coming from the other institution into KEMRI to train people on a procedure that is part of the protocol, or sending someone, a younger person from KEMRI to the other institution to learn something from the UK or from America to bring back into KEMRI. So I believe it needs to be a two-way process, but then all we need is proper standards of operation, proper rules, proper procedures that govern how we are moving samples and moving people between our collaborating labs and our labs in Africa. So that's what I think about it.
That's fairly clear. So I think, what is it, you again? Yeah. Comment on that one. Okay. I mean, do you agree?
I do agree with her. It could imply that we have to do the IP contracts before maybe research is started off, if there is potential for commercialization, or even just potential of enabling the university contributing the material to have more control on the research. So I was wondering about the TRIPS, that is the just a minute. So there is this trade agreement on IPs, and whereby maybe they'll enable better frameworks on which we can base our IP contracts with our funding collaborators. However, I'd like to talk about what the doctor from Nigeria said, whereby African universities and research institutes should have a good research strategy such that they become authorities in specific research areas, just like multinational companies do, whereby a multinational company, when it is filing an IP, usually it will target to reap the maximum financial benefit from that IP. As well, it will strive to excel in that technology, such that if you mention this technology, you'll just know it's coming from this company. Or if you mention this company, you'll know it's the one producing this technology. And I think there are a number of competitive advantage areas where African universities can have that. For example, in natural product research, so that if you hear of an organic product or a natural product, or even when pharmaceutical companies are looking for new molecules, they'll just know the best university to go for maybe new molecules from plant material or from marine products. Then I should go to this university in Africa. Then it means Africa now will be using its advantage to do the best research, because you can only compete where you have an advantage, not where you have a disadvantage.
So I think that there are two issues there. I mean, one is the sort of exchange of samples in the more academic research, which I think we all do. I mean, I'm sure others does in Liverpool and London, we're sending samples everywhere all the time because you're sharing, science is international to do that, but you have to have some regulation over that. Yeah, I mean, what Ron is saying is does become more issue when something has a potential financial value. I mean, if you're developing a vaccine and you're sending something, or you're developing a new plant-based product, that is a slightly different issue that you have to get the lawyers involved and the whole thing. But I think perhaps we have got better with the sharing the samples at the academic research level by employing the sort of things that Janet's talking about. I mean, you agree with that?
Yes,
do you have problems in Kilifi?
Not at all. Actually, in Kilifi, we also have a system where we very often require samples to come from a Western lab into Kilifi. And we have something called a materials transfer agreement, which is normally drawn from the originating institution. I have recently had to deal with one where I had a very sensitive falciparum sample coming from a Western lab, and it's a sample that has the potential, is currently involved in a vaccine development process, and so it had a lot of legal issues that we had to deal with. But eventually the other lab agreed and sent it in. But of course, our legal department and their legal department had to speak very closely, outlining exactly what we're going to use the samples for, and they own the research. Whatever we're going to do with it, we have to disclose. We have to disclose our findings, and I believe it should be two-way that way, so that when we're giving them our material, then we draw the materials transfer agreement and we outline exactly what we expect them to do with it, to an extent that if the protocol changes and they find out something and would like to go forward and do something a little more than what was in the original agreement, then a new agreement has to be drawn up so that everyone is happy. So we don't end up being always just shipping samples out and not being sure what's going to happen with our samples when they're out there.
Yeah, I think that is working reasonably well, and we should not lose sight of the fact that there are certain things that we still cannot do, and maybe we're also not equipped to do. Recently, we've established collaboration with Cambridge and I think another lab in Australia, looking at some of the bad viruses and their transmission and things. I mean, there is no way that I'm going to pretend we could do this in Accra. But the thing is disclosure. So we know exactly what is going to happen in Cambridge, we know what is happening in Australia, and we are talking all the time about these. That is, say, on high end of very highly pathogenic organisms. On some of the other things we're doing, working on borreliosa, for example, again, our labs are not equipped to do some of the assays that are needed and things, and samples are going between us and again a couple of labs in Australia and coming back to us and those things. So along those lines, I think my view is once we're all very clear and know what exactly is happening at any particular time, that could be done. The other thing we need to do as research institutes and as universities is also take the whole enterprise of research a bit more seriously and have the offices which will support us in some of these areas, because when it gets into the IP issues and things, none of us are really equipped to handle all those legalese and things that we need to do, and you may end up either not sending the sample or just saying, okay, take it and let me have my piece and things. So I think the universities and the institutions should support us and have that sort of things more efficiently done on our behalf than we see at the moment.
Okay. So I'm keeping an eye on the time, so I think we should move on. I mean, so we have just a few minutes at the end. So Eric has been very patient. I think that's the last. So you're going to...
Thank you very much, Brian. I've been indeed extremely patient. I'm waiting for my last turn as well. So I'm supposed to address the issue of research on in terms of the expenses. Now, I know the intended outcomes of the workshop that Francis is coordinating, I think, with increase or to raise awareness on malaria research, with the hope that we'll be able to inspire or motivate young African scientists to venture into this area of research, and therefore be able to address, in my opinion, what I always refer to as the African agenda for malaria research, which is prioritized. And also, we hope that by the end, we should be able to be equipped, be equipped enough to be able to have information which we would need to lobby or advocate with our national governments to change their mentality of depriving the African scientists from having access to funds which they can use to provide data important for the reduction of the disease burden, or maybe contribute to the drive towards the elimination of malaria. So Africa's dilemmas are many, because we're faced with challenges of providing healthcare to our communities, and this may be due to a heavy debt burden, chronic poverty, even though we have so many natural resources, a high disease burden, such as the NCDs, CDs, and particularly the threats of emerging infectious diseases, and particularly parasitic diseases, amongst which we have malaria. So we need to engage in research which addresses some of the local problems that we're facing. So what are the problems? What are some of the problems that we're facing in terms of malaria research in Africa? The top on the list is poor funding of research of African institutions, which has resulted in brain drain. Secondly, there's a heavy dependence on external funding to conduct high-quality research with little or no funding from the African governments. And there's a lack of advanced technology, which has resulted in the shipment of samples for analysis outside Africa with no transfer of skills to African institutions, etc., etc. So is malaria research expensive? Research on its own may be expensive in the sense that to carry out innovative or groundbreaking research, we need to fulfill some important prerequisites. Topmost is the appropriate infrastructure, as some colleagues have presented on that. We need to have the right kind of facilities on ground, which will provide us the opportunities to run the kind of tests that we need to do. And second, in terms of priority, is to have core equipment. That's a major gap that we have in almost all African institutions, except what I would call in quotes the existing centers of excellence, which are all extensions of the colonial masters. So we need core equipment, which needs to be implanted, instituted, installed in the institutions of research. And then thirdly, we need a critical number of adequately trained human resources at all levels, and ensure their sustainability in order to prevent brain drain. We've talked heavily about that. Next, we need to put in place a quality management system to ensure that the results that we're going to obtain and disseminate is reliable. The next, something we're trying to develop now is to have experienced administrative and financial management structure, which will ensure that we can manage our resources, our research resources, etc. And then, of other importance, is the global access to information. We need to have stable and rapid IT facilities. We need to have available for us opportunities or services that can maintain our equipment or repair them, or where we can purchase key reagents and research materials. The laboratories have to undergo accreditation, and then we have access to functional regulatory bodies like Institutional Review Board, institutes that approve us to import new products, etc., etc. But there's one other one which is staggering us in the face, that everybody can look at the other and don't lie, and that's that of water and electricity that is stable. So over 90% of the African countries, you can never guarantee that when you're in the lab, if you don't have a backup, you can complete an experiment. So these are, although we're talking about funding, I think that's two major resources that we need: water and electricity that is stable. So is there added value if we create centers of excellence, or should funding for malaria research be awarded to all African institutions? Now, if you listen to what I've just presented as a prerequisite in order to achieve state-of-the-art research, we need huge funding in order to achieve this. Can this therefore be achievable in all African institutions undertaking research in malaria? I think capital no. Capital N-O. Given the economic situation of most African countries and the lack of political will to commit natural resources in and to invest that in malaria research. How then can we cost-effectively pursue an African-led research agenda for malaria research towards reducing the disease burden or even eliminating the disease? I think that the creation of Center of Excellence provides a sustainable opportunity, amongst others. I'm not saying that that's the most, not to address this issue. examples do exist from which we can draw experiences. We have the EDCTP, funding scheme for regional nodes of excellence, where we have the central, the west, southern, and eastern, I think. Okay. And then also, of course, EVIMalaR, which is a European Network of Excellence funding scheme from the European Union, etc. So we see that the concept of phenomenon of instituting centers of excellence is a welcome one because why? What would be the mandate of these centers? And I'm saying this in my opinion and just generally, that they need to we need these centers to conduct high quality research and to address local problems, which will provide useful information that we need to control disease and reduce the disease burden, or if not, eliminate malaria. African scientists can best prioritize the research needs of the countries as they live in the problem. These centers need to advise the ministries of health and other stakeholders on the action steps that they need to take in order to control the disease, or monitor the changing disease patterns, drug resistance, and to draw government attention to changing epidemiologies. And also serve as a reference center for rapid interventions in cases of epidemics, and also provide a platform for the analysis of samples, like say requiring advanced technologies. This will be national collaboration or collaboration between South-South institutions, etc., etc. Can this scenario therefore be achieved by African governments? Yes, capital yes. We've heard it severally that the money is there, but the management seems to be one of the problems. But I will also add on it that the political will by African leaders is lacking. We've not been able to, I think my Uganda colleague put it so aptly, that we've not been able to have enough advocates and lobbyists meet those who make decisions in the highest points and have to talk to their hearts. Because if you tell somebody that by the time I finish this speech, 30 children will be dead, or that is equivalent, and each day is a jumbo jet crashing in the ocean, or you can tell them that I just saw 3 women going back home with their children carried in a box instead of being strapped on their back where they're crying and looking to mother's warmth, that they can actually, their consciences and emotions can be touched, that they can make a U-turn and start thinking about committing the resources that we have available, which we anticipate is being plundered or being put in the wrong channel. Then we'll be able to save lives, and then that will provide a healthy community, which is important to drive development, etc. Also, we need to, like I said, increase advocacy on African governments that they can fund malaria research. Then who can we approach to solve the research problems in Africa? We've said several things, but I think there are policymakers, that those involved who take the decisions that we have this amount of money in our budget this year, and this is how we are going to spend it. Who are these? Most of the time, they are parliamentarians, senators, those who are involved in the ministries that are involved in disease control, etc., etc. Even the private sector. I think we need to meet with these guys and constitute an advocacy group that can lobby for funding to be allocated for research in African institutions, where we can then realize our dream, like the Senegalese dream, of training local scientists who are versed with the local problems and can solve, instead of using what we call the fire brigade approach of quenching the crisis, etc., but can methodically have a vision of where we are and where we're moving to. Because when you listen to so many presentations, it is a recapitulation or giving you what are the successes recorded in some institutions which are centers of excellence. But what we should ask them, rather, is that where are they coming from? Because we're only seeing the successes recorded now, but they're coming from somewhere. Because that provides a blueprint or a very important step that we need to be able to adapt in order to change our own institutions. Because we need many of these in order to drive development in Africa. Otherwise, we end up with regionalized or institutions that are sitting down there and they then decide for the whole African continent how we should move on. Rather than being a situation where we have stakeholders from different regions who will sit on an equal basis and make decisions on how to drive malaria out of Africa. So should malaria research funding there be limited to centers of excellence? In my opinion, I think no. I think that the public and private institutions should be funded to some level, that will ensure that there's some amount of research going on there and capacity building in particular. because, and this should be done in collaboration with the Centers of Excellence, because we need to have a crop of young African scientists, and this can only be developed in the universities. And most of the universities, as you can see from the presentations, have a problem with, in terms of the way they manage the resources and the quality of research that is done there. So, but all the same, most of the scientists, the majority of the scientists come from there. The research institutes probably just provide research and provide the basic facilities for running the assays, but in terms of the scientific thought process and pursuing a research agenda that is set by the university. So we need to be able to get them functioning and be able to put through these products who then will be recycled in the research arena. And that's why we need to have a postdoc program, which again is a loophole area in Africa, because we have so many of us were trained by Jane, and we left, we came back with PhD, and we were left alone to move around and navigate in a blind alley and the whirlpool until we found ourselves somewhere. We thank God that some found themselves in the right places, some found themselves in the wrong places, because we don't have institutionalized a really functional postdoctoral training program where people can compete from the PhD in Senegal, and then they can stay in Senegal or move to Cameroon and undergo a postdoc, in which they are trained again in an African setting, and then become familiarized with the issues that address us. I'm finished. So therefore, in conclusion, I would think that African governments need to rise up to the expectations of the Africans and take their responsibilities of funding malaria research and on an agenda set by the African scientists. This action, we hope, will stimulate research, enable scientists to address local problems, and prevent brain drain. This, we think, can be achieved through sustainable funding of centers of excellence for malaria research, which will provide a mechanism for us to be able to fight the disease and eliminate it from our community. Thank you very much.
I'm going to disagree with Eric on one fact that he suggested that research for funding for malaria research should go to many institutes or should be spread to many institutes rather than just be concentrated on a few centers of excellence. Actually, when we're drafting this point, I was thinking of super centers of excellence, like big institutes like the MRC Gambia, the University of Cape Town, and Kemri Kirifi, you know, just to give some examples. But Eric also just reminded me that there are some funded EDCTP centers of excellence. And I think it would be really important if, say, you know, external funders and, you know, African governments, maybe even the World Bank, you know, can come together and concentrate their funding for malaria research in these institutes, because then you create not only centers of excellence where really good research is done, but also where, you know, everybody from the continent who wants to train in malaria research will go to train and then go back to their country to be involved in control. So I think the funding for malaria control should be to every institute that is, you know, involved in controlling malaria. But for research, we should concentrate that money into a few centers of research excellence that would serve the whole continent, but not just the whole continent. You would also, you know, interact with other institutes, maybe in Europe and America, etc. And of course, you know, would be integrated with other, you know, like virtual research institutes like EVIMalaR, just to name an example. And if we did that, of course, then we would have the right infrastructure in these centers. You know, would have the right equipment, and maybe we wouldn't even need to send our samples to the Sangha for sequencing. Maybe we'd be sending them to MRC, the Gambia, or to UCT, or to, you know, yeah, that's my take.
I mean, I think this is you know, we perhaps get some feedback from the audience on this, because this is a difficult issue. I mean, if you have a fixed amount of money, how do you spend that? Do you have one center in the country, or do you try and spread it around your universities? And to do that, and if I ask everybody to put their hands up and say, are they in favor of having centers of excellence, I think everybody here would put their hand up and say yes, provided it was my center. So I mean that is the problem, because if you go that route, for which we had an eloquent case of why that's a sensible thing to do, there will be some people inevitably who are doing good work in a smaller university or something who will be cut off from that. So there is a tension there. So what does people think? I mean, quickly, then we have a...
Okay, I think, yes, I'll agree with you, there's a tension there, but I think if we're doing this, then it's not just saying we're setting up a center of excellence or centers of excellence somewhere, but we need to look at all the issues which we go through. For example, taking care of the person in a small place who's doing very good work and things. What will be the links of that person to the center, or are you going to absorb that person to the center? What policies do we have in moving Eric from Cameroon to Kemri or to Gambia or something, because we know he's doing very good work on malaria in Cameroon? I don't know whether we're going to drive this ourselves or the institutions will have to. I think it was mentioned earlier on that probably we may have to decide as institutions, these are areas that we're interested in and we're going to drive forward for that, and then be known for doing some work in those areas. I don't know how best we'll be able to draw the line onto some of these things, but we need to take account of all these issues as we're going ahead on this.
So comments, who would like their center?
Just one question. I mean, with the centers of excellence, you're driving up excellence, of course. So what you're doing is increasing the quality. But what does that mean for career opportunities for African researchers? Doesn't it go in the opposite direction, that you have fewer centers, fewer scientists? Oh, sorry. My name's Shahid Khan. I'm from the University of Leiden, Leiden University Medical Center in the Netherlands.
So I agree with Shahid. That was actually one of my points as well. And I think, without preempting too much what I want to say this afternoon about EVIMalaR, but that's the model that EVIMalaR is doing. Is not, there are research centers of excellence, but it also includes partners in a virtual institute. And that allows the technology platform access, that allows the expertise exchange between these members of a virtual institute or these partners in a virtual institute. So it's not to say all the eggs into one basket and those are the best people in the world. Those best people in the world might be spread all over. And maybe that is a model that we as African scientists should really be exploiting, is to get a network of excellence set up that is spread all over the continent. And then we can then coordinate efforts with other international networks. And there's been models, AMANET, for instance, there's been models like that, but we need to decide on what level are we going to do that and what the outcome of such a network would be.
I think perhaps the word center brings in this thinking of it's in a specific geographical location. Yes. It has 4 walls around it and a defined population who work in that center. And perhaps that's not the terminology we really want to talk about. The terminology we want to talk about is creating consortia of excellence or networks of excellence. And within these consortia, there may be a center, but the concept is not around centers. So I think if we take out the word center, we all agree that some form of bringing the best brains and together so that they can network, so that they can produce better, so they can do transfer of knowledge, so that they can support each other, is a very good concept. So I think if we really think outside center, I think there's more consensus than if we think of center.
It's a sort of, it's what some people call a virtual center, isn't it, really? But we should probably have another word for that. And a consortium's not quite the right. I don't think we have quite the right word yet. Yes.
I might disagree with her to some extent. There are some expensive research areas like natural products, isolation, characterization, and synthesis. So I think we should also have central facilities. Like if you have expensive equipments like mass spec, NMR, or maybe the PCRs, which are expensive to maintain and purchase, then we should have a central facility whereby people from different universities can be allowed to go there and run their samples, and that will enhance the research output.
I'm not going to try and summarize the whole thing, and maybe this afternoon people who come back would have to do that, but I think we have got some clear messages. I mean, one is the issue of funding, and I think everybody does agree that, you know, there are resources in most countries in Africa, and it's different from 20 years ago, and virtually all countries are, with a few exceptions, the GDP is going up 10 or 15 or 20% per year. It's the fastest economic growing sub-Saharan Africa anyway, even Tanzania is going up 60%, I think Ghana's 20%. So whilst most other economies are shrinking, and it's good to hear that people's salaries are going up quite rapidly. My salary in analysis is going down quite substantially in the last few, 10%. So I mean, the situation has changed, and to think that extra money is all going to come from the north, I don't think is a realistic thing anymore. So and how's that money going to be got? It's going to, as we've heard, has to be by advocacy, and I mean, and that probably is an area that needs a lot more thought. And some people, it often depends on an individual or a group or something. Have been successful to doing that. I mean, but then when you've got the money, that we've heard from Warren, the organisation may not be optimum, and that money needs to be spent well. And MTAs, I think that's not such a big issue, but we do have this issue of, if you have got your money and it's been spent well, how do you do it? Do you build it, spread it just a little bit to everybody? Every university gets 3% or the money that's going for the basic research, or do you focus it? And I think there does seem to be a reasonable agreement that you do have to have nodes or something where you have your mass spec. You're not going to have mass spec everywhere, but to have some sort of networks is probably the way to do that. Now, I just recently had a very interesting example of that. I mean, somebody who's coming back to Ghana to do astrophysics, and you wouldn't think actually that would be the sort of thing to do that. Very, very well trained in the United States to set up a network. And in fact, South Africa here has setting up a multiple array, the most advanced one one of the most advanced ones in the world. They're converting a disused mobile telephone dish in Ghana to work in that. And so they've got networks all over from that, doing the most sophisticated science, but bringing in, and there's one in East Africa, bringing in Ghana and so on and things. So I think that probably is the sort of way we can see things moving.